Welcome to Hearth of Heroes, a quiet fireside for tales that travel far and linger late. Feel free to let us know from what shore, valley, or city you are listening, and settle as the story slowly unfolds. Within the northern night, soft snow drifted over darkened dunes, yet inside the golden hall of hero hearthfire hummed and horns of honeyed mead were raised. King Hrothgar, grey of beard but bright of spirit, had summoned masons, smiths, and singers to craft a refuge where joy could gather like dawn beneath a roof of beams as broad as ship keels. The hall stood tall as a towering tree, its walls dressed with carved oak and amber inlay, its benches long enough for an army of friends. Evening after evening, warriors traded tales, poets stitched song to melody, and laughter rolled like warm wind across a harvest field. The Danes believed such brightness would keep every shadow beyond the threshold, for where community is, cruelty hesitates. Yet beyond the lighted lintel another creature listened, born of the bleak moors where mist never lifts and the loam remembers blood. Grendel, descendant of that first fratricide Cain, dragged a legacy of exile behind him like clanking chains. No hearth fire had ever welcomed him, nor had friendly hands offered platter or place. Scorn had shaped sinew, solitude had sharpened hunger. Each night, when the mead bench music reached its fullest flourish, envy echoed through the beast's hollow heart, and the monstrous wanderer waded through swamps and starlit fen toward Heorot's glowing gables. The door, though crafted from oaken slabs thicker than a warrior's shield, split wide beneath strength that scorned iron bands. Suddenly, song became scream, and tables tipped as Grendel gathered bodies with grim ease, devouring flesh, still warm with wonder. Dawn would find benches bloodied, banners torn, and warriors weeping for brothers they could no longer rouse. Hrothgar himself, though ring-rich and revered, walked the silent aisles like a father searching for lullabies he could no longer sing. He ordered pyres upon the cliff-top, their pale pillars of smoke twisting into morning sky as though the very souls of the slain sought safer starfields. Yet the terror was not confined to death. It was the dread of doors unclosed, songs unsung, benches bereft. In fearful whispers, folk told one another that the marshes held more than bog lights, that the water itself might be kin to the stalker. Mothers muttered charms. Children kept wakeful watch, and hunting horns lay untouched, for who could cheerfully chase deer when night could break like a blade against the breast? Seasons shifted, bringing ripe sheaves, then frost, yet Heorot's high hall remained shuttered after sunset. Warriors who once boasted of voyages now bowed to vacancy. Even minstrels, whose memories held the lineage of kings, felt notes fall flat, for how can melody mount when mirth has been maimed? Thus the radiant hall, raised to cradle community, became a cavern of recalled rejoicing, its silence louder than any feast-day cheer. Far away, cross slanting swells of the whale road, traders carried tidings of the terror. At bustling harbors they spoke in undertones, as though the monster might leap from the brine-lapped hulls of their ships. Some insisted the fiend was forged from midnight metal. Others claimed it wore the shapes of wolves by day. All agreed that Heorot, jewel of the north, had been dimmed, its conquests turned to candles struggling in wind. In the court of Hygelac, king among the Geats, such words wafted like wood smoke above a distant fire. There dwelt a warrior named Beowulf, broader across the shoulders than most men are tall, yet calm of countenance, inclined more to quiet regard than restless roar. He listened while seafarers sketched the sorrow, and as they spoke, the embers in the hearth mirrored the ember kindling inside his breast. Beowulf recalled how the winds of youth had carried him through wide waters, alongside friend Breca, wrestling sea creatures beneath moonlit crests. He had survived storms that snapped masts, and contests that left lesser men in awe. Yet none of those exploits felt complete, for they served more to test his limbs than to lift a people. The plight of Hrothgar's hall stirred another kind of longing, not for triumph alone, but for tenderness restored, for laughter released from chains of fear. He rose from the bench, the quiet motion causing the iron-bound floorboards to murmur. Courtiers watched as he approached Hygelac's seat, yet even before words were spoken, the king sensed the course of his champion's heart. There passed between them a silence thick with unspoken permission. Go, if you must, and guard your honor with grace. Beowulf voiced his wish to sail, to stand where Danish dreams lay broken, to meet the marsh-walker with nothing but his own hands. Soon shipwrights unmoored the prow-high vessel, while Beowulf selected companions proven more by loyalty than by boasts. They packed wolf-pelt cloaks, finely forged mail, bright as fish scales, yet at Beowulf's bidding they left behind any blade whose sharpness might dull courage's edge. He intended to grapple with Grendel skin to skin, trusting the ancient strength of bone and belief. As the tide turned, mothers of the Geats handed bundles of bread and berries to the voyagers, while fathers pressed palms to hilts in solemn salute. Wind unfurled the sail, and the prow, carved with curling beasts, pointed toward a horizon hushed in pearl-gray haze. The ship slipped from familiar fjord like a swan leaving its nesting reeds, and water whispered against the hull in careful cadence, as though bidding safe passage. Upon the deck, Beowulf stood steady, eyes considering the curve of sky over sea. Night draped the waves with velvet blue, constellations casting their silver spokes along the moving nearer. In that quiet, he thought not of the monster's maw, or the menace awaiting, but of the hush that would one day settle softly over Heorot once laughter returned. Meanwhile, in the Danish kingdom, torchlights still trembled in corridors where warriors kept watch. The great chair of Hrothgar remained vacant. Come midnight, for the king refused to sup while his people cowered. Yet even amid misery, hope hovered like the faint fragrance of summer clover in early spring. Word had reached them of a Geatish hero assembling oarsmen, and though few dared to believe salvation could sail over the rim of the world, candles once snuffed were lit anew before icons of ancient gods. Days slid into nights, and the ship's timbers groaned in gentle rhythm, like a cradle on Mother Ocean's knee. Gulls circled, then abandoned the mast as distant cliffs of weathered chalk rose to meet them. Beowulf's crew stowed the sail, dipping oars through foam bright as crushed quartz, and the vessel glided toward the same beaches where, legend claimed, early Danes had first set their standard. On moon-washed midnights, while the crew dozed in cloaks beside coiled rope, Beowulf remained awake beneath the fluttering sail. He heard the hollow sighs of the mast, the faraway trumpet of whales sounding in the cold depths, and he wondered whether Grendel too ever paused to listen to any voice but the drum of his own deprivation. Such musings were not pity. They were the mild curiosity of a warrior who knew that every foe begins as an emptiness seeking to be filled. Along the gunwale lanterns flickered, gilding his features with amber halos, and salt spray cooled the quiet heat of his thoughts. Stars leaned toward dawn, and Beowulf at last allowed his eyelids to lower, trusting the ship, the sea, and the sure song of purpose that kept them all aligned. Early morning found the crew sharing simple fare of oats and dried fruit, each bite flavored by the hush before landfall. They spoke softly of families, of orchards and antlered hills, reminding themselves that courage is braided from many small memories, not merely from the bright flash of battle. A dull, sudden cry revealed the scent of pine drifting off unseen cliffs, and hearts quickened not with fear, but with readiness. Soon shields painted with boar heads would ring against shore pebbles, and boots would press new paths toward the troubled hall. Yet for this final floating hour the warriors simply breathed, drawing in a gentle promise of meetings still ahead. Mist still clung to the gables of King Hygelac's hall when the torches dwindled to embers, and the hushed tale of Grindel's night-bound savagery came to its last echo. In that dim, expectant quiet, Beowulf rose, the glow of the hearth flickering over rings of mail resting like calm water upon his broad shoulders. The silence after the story settled upon the gathered deets like a frost, finer than hoarfrost upon winter fields. Yet beneath the coolness lay a pulse of purpose, slow and certain as though the earth itself had inhaled and now waited for the measured exhale of destiny. While dawn unrolled pale banners across the eastern sky, preparations unfolded with the deliberate grace of seasoned ritual. Spears were inspected for subtle splits, bronze fittings tapped with tender knuckles to listen for hidden flaws. Edgetegs moved among the weapon racks, their voices little more than murmurs, like low surf along shingle shores. Shields, cedar-framed and ox-hide-faced, were warmed close to the hearth so that their bindings stayed supple. Each warrior traced the curve of his own with almost affectionate care, recalling storms weathered and oaths remembered. Beowulf meanwhile opened the great oaken chest that held Heorot's ancient byrnie. He ran a contemplative hand along the interlinked mail, its iron rings dulled by age yet sound, and the faint rasp of metal upon nail carried timeless reassurance. In the brightening hush he buckled the corselet, not with haste, but as one might lace memories onto the body. Provisioners brought forth honey-scented bread, dried lingonberries, and well-smoked sides of salmon, setting them in orderly rows within wicker panniers meant for sea travel. The smell of spruce and tar drifted in from the strand below the cliffs where the ship-ribbed, pine-planked waited. Rowers descended first, their footfalls muffled in dew-drenched grass. Each offered a brief glance to the high mead hall behind them, less a farewell than a silent pledge to return. Overhead, ravens wheeled lazily, their wings moving without hurry in widening arcs, as though writing slow runes upon the morning. Before the prow, a priest of the old ways poured mead upon the sand, letting the earth drink her share. He spoke almost inaudibly, coaxing wind and wave to keep a gentle countenance. Nearby, the young king heard, and allowed the words to drift across him like mild rain. He neither shunned nor clung to them, for his trust rested in lived strength, in comradeship well proved, and in the calm regard of fate that does not rush. When the libation sank wholly beneath the grains, the tide answered with a faint sigh, the first invitation of the Heorot. Boards creaked underfoot as the chosen company embarked. Sunlight touched the ship's figurehead, carved like a silent swan, its neck curving forward as if already leaning into distance. Oars slid outward, each blade resting atop the silver-blue skin of the sea. The moment before the first pull stretched, weightless, and then, almost imperceptibly, wood kissed water, and forward motion began. No shout broke the morning. Instead, the rhythm grew the way dusk gathers shore, inevitable and soft. Gannets traced white lines overhead. Their shadows skimmed the sail like passing thoughts. Hours lengthened. The ship's wake turned to braided threads, sparkling and then vanishing. The Geats sat easy at their benches, talking in low cadences about homesteads and harvests, the topics chosen not to stir the blood but to soothe it. Beowulf, seated near the mast, watched cloud herds drift westward. He remembered the counsel of his kin, the measured pride in Hygelac's eyes, and the blessing of Wheel Theo that had traveled on rumor across the sea. Every recollection unfurled, slowly, the way smoke curves from pinewood when there is no wind to force it. At mid-voyage an omen appeared, though it unfolded without alarm. A great fish, mottled silver beneath the waves, surfaced beside the hull, pacing the ship with languid strokes of its broad tail. Warriors leaned outward, but the creature's presence felt companionable, almost protective. Sunlight shimmered on its back like hammered pewter before it descended, leaving only circular ripples. Some took it for a sign that the road ahead would cradle rather than convulse, and a hush of gratitude settled, deepening the ship's serenity. When night bled slowly into being, stars pricked the firmament, small lanterns hung by patient hands. A moderate breeze filled the square sail, carrying the vessel onward with a hush, akin to pages turning in a well-loved volume. The men slept in shifts, heads cushioned on rolled cloaks, dreams braided with muted wave-song. Beowulf remained wakeful until moonrise, his gaze tracing constellations familiar since childhood. At last, when he felt the ship and sky breathe in unison, he closed his eyes, surrendering to the measured rocking that echoed a mother's cradle, long outgrown yet never forgotten. Grey dawn revealed the low shoreline of Denmark, its dunes pale as drifted snow, its forests standing dark and still behind. The ship nose kissed shingle. Anchor stones were lowered without clamor. Mail gleamed subdued in the new light as warriors stepped onto foreign sand. A watchman, tall upon the headland and cloaked against brine spray, descended with spear in hand, more curious than combative. His words, when they came, held formality, but not threat. Beowulf answered with measured respect, recounting lineage and lawful purpose. Titles named, gifts promised, intentions clarified like water poured through cloth. The Dane guided them up the gentle path toward Heorot's timbered majesty. Along the way, fields lay restful, barley shifting under a calm breeze. In the distance the hall rose, gold-stitched in sunlight, though dread still haunted its nightly timbers. Children observed from doorways, wide-eyed, not with fear, but with marvel at mail-clad strangers whose footfalls disturbed neither bird nor beast. Oxen grazing near stone walls flicked their ears, but did not shy. All held an undercurrent of expectation, like the hush before the first notes of a harp. They reached the hall at noon, when shadow lines fell shortest. Hrothgar's herald admitted them. Inside, beams of oak arched overhead like quiet breakers frozen in wood. Tapestry stirred in mild draughts, depicting sea voyages, ancestor king feats, and woven beast whose eyes seemed subdued by passing time. Beowulf stood before the Danish throne, speaking unwaveringly of his aim to rid the hall of its nocturnal torment. Hrothgar listened, age resting gently upon him, gratitude steady in his gaze, yet the memory of many losses softened his reply. He accepted, though grief had already trained him to expect little from hope. Not all hearts yielded so quickly. From a bench near the hearth rose Unferth, son of Ecglaf, bearer of fame and blemish alike. His hair caught emberglow, and in his eye lived a subtle storm seldom stilled. Words came deliberate, edged yet restrained, as he questioned the Geat's past triumphs, naming the swimming contest with Brika, alleging rashness and defeat. The hall grew quiet as snowfield under starlight, every ear inclined though no hand strayed toward weapon. Beowulf replied without haste, his voice level as low tide across flat sand. He named the perils he had endured, the sea beasts vanquished, the long night survived. Each sentence flowed with the certainty of water seeking its level. No boast jarred the ear, no barb was returned. Unferth's challenge, laid bare under such composure, lost its sting and slipped away like smoke through rafters. Hrothgar signaled for the tension to melt into mead. Horns were carried forth, their rims catching lamplight. Honeyed drink poured gold threads into silvered cups. Bread, warm as afternoon sun, was broken and shared. The fragrance of roasted herbs drifted, soothing as a remembered lullaby. Music followed. Harp strings awakened, each note descending like a soft-winged bird to nest among listening minds. Warriors spoke of distant winters, of laughter found alongside sorrow, their voices intertwined in a web of common endurance. In one corner, a scald-shaped verse about the Geat's journey. His cadence scarcely rose above the crackle of the hearth, yet every phrase painted sea and sail, omen and oath, drifting through consciousness like gentle current. Outside, twilight folded slowly over gables. Within, candles lent their quiet constancy. Beowulf sat among Danes and Geats alike, his presence neither looming nor diminished, simply woven into the fabric of the hour. Even Unferth, nursing private thoughts, allowed his shoulders to slacken as mead warmed him from sternum to spirit. When the meal waned, benches were cleared, and bedding spread upon polished floorboards. The great fire was banked, embers glowing soft as heartbeats. Hrothgar spoke once more, thanking his guests with a wearied sincerity and withdrawing to lighter slumber behind tapestry screens. Beowulf remained in the hall, declining armor and weapon for the night to come, trusting instead to trained sinew and tranquil resolve. His companions followed his example, laying swords within reach, yet loosening the thongs upon their hilts. Preparedness breathed alongside ease, neither one outweighing the other. Constellations climbed the heavens beyond smoke-hole vents, and an owl called from afar, muted by distance and walls signaling the hour when stories fade into dreams. The hall's pillars stood sentinel, casting columned shadows that shifted slowly across slumbering faces. Calm prevailed, though somewhere beyond the mere, a darker presence stirred, its path already winding toward Heorot's doors. Yet for this moment, tranquility wrapped the company as surely as woolen cloaks. Thus the whale road crossed, the challenge accepted, words measured and mead shared. The scene prepares itself for the hush before conflict. Tomorrow's tide will bring the testing of sinew and spirit. Tonight, the quiet rest of those who have set their course and trust the slow, sure turning of fate. The embers that lingered at the heart of Heorot still breathed a shy maroon glow, their gentle crackling the final note of the last tales sung before rest, trusting the vast hall's oaken frame to cradle every sigh of their slumber. Smoke curled upward in slow ribbons, threading itself through rafters dark as river stone. The wind outside pressed once against the gable and then withdrew, as though even the storm respected the hush that had settled over King Hrothgar's home. Midnight deepened, quiet but watchful. Shields, bright earlier in the evening, no longer caught the firelight. They had become pale moons along the walls, each rim of iron standing sentinel. Above them hung spears whose points glimmered like distant stars, fixed yet faint in the gloom. Rough-hewn pillars, carved long ago with curling serpents and sea waves, held up the lofty roof, and those carvings seemed to drift between wakefulness and sleep, their outlines shifting in the trembling emberlight. Beneath the carvings, rows of sleeping warriors lay in ordered calm, every chest rising in an unhurried tide. The distant hush of the nearby marsh, too remote to be heard by day, now pulsed through silence, a pulsing that felt more sense than heard, a pulse that hinted at something stirring beyond hill and fen. In that half-lit hush, a single figure remained fully awake. Beowulf, son of Egithiel, sat upright upon his bench, arms folded loosely, every breath measured yet light. He did not pace nor fret. Instead, he studied the slow dance of shadows across the roof beams, learning how darkness moved in this foreign hall. The champion's mailed shirt had been set aside. Only the quiet strength of sinew and resolve clothed him now. Around him, the soft breathing of his men mingled with the faint rustle of straw. The slight hiss of the fire reminded him of waves licking Geatish cliffs far away. Smaller sounds an iron buckle settling, a dreamer whispering, a mouse skimming the edges of a grain sack entered his hearing, and drifted out again, so that anything new would stand apart. Hours passed that could not be measured by candle or clock, yet those listening hearts knew them. For a subtle change arrived first, a stirring among the horses tethered beyond the palisade, then a quiver in the dogs that slept near the threshold. Their low growls fled into whimpers, the night air seemed to thin, becoming keen, as though some unseen frost sharpened its edges. Beowulf tilted his head, eyes still half-lidded, as if inviting the darkness to speak plainly. The timbers overhead moaned a deeper note. Somewhere, far down the moonlit slope, a reed bed parted. What crept out of that parting left no echo of foot or claw upon the frosted earth, yet every creature of blood and breath felt its advance. Grendel came. Not suddenly, not with the crash of drama, but with the inevitability of tide returning to shore. First a faint reek wove into the hall through the lower gaps of the great door, dank moss, spilt ichor, long-trapped sorrow. Then the iron bands of that door bowed, not struck open, but pressed as though by a great slow weight of water. Wood groaned, but no hinge screamed. Splinters whispered downward like quiet rain. A wide darkness filled the doorway, deeper than the night behind it, and within that darkness two pale glints hovered eyes, wary yet hungry. The monster did not roar. Instead, he breathed, and that breath alone seemed to smother every glowing coal, soaking the chamber with a dread so heavy it felt almost velvety. He stepped forward, shape uncertain, neither holy beast nor holy man, armored in shagged night where moonlight clung without comfort. Fingertips, long as hunting horns, brushed the rush-strewn floor. He listened, sniffing, mouth curling back from teeth, broad as a blacksmith's tongs. Ahead lay 30 sleeping men. He did not count them, but hunger did. Soft as a drifting cloak, he bent over the nearest resting Dane, and before dream could flee the sleeper, that dreamer was gone, folded into the beast's embrace, bone and breath broken beneath silence. Flesh tore, yet the tearing sounded like fabric being slowly drawn apart, damp but muted. Those still sleeping shifted, but did not wake. Grendel marveled at how easily they yielded, for no sword rose against him, and the heat of blood tasted mere sweet. What followed might have become the same red litany sung on many former nights. Yet tonight a watcher waited. As the monster turned toward his second prey, he noticed the tall shape seated upon a bench, a man who did not lie prone, a man whose gaze met his without quiver. Surprise rippled behind those pale glints, like wind brushing stagnant water. Grendel tilted his head. So did Beowulf, in small mirror of greeting. No challenge spoke from lips or claw, yet the old timber pillars seemed to lean inward, curious at this new design. Beowulf rose, unhurried. The wooden floor, strewn with reeds, accepted his bare feet without sound. He walked forward the length of a spear shaft, neither brandishing weapon nor raising voice. Strategy had ripened during hours of stillness. No blade could pierce the demon's hide. Tales had said, so sinew must answer sinew. He let arms hang loose, letting shoulders sag as though tired, lulling the watcher into imagining frailty. Grendel, bemused, straightened to his full height, hide brushing the roof's crossbeam. The hush between them felt long as winter dusk, yet held barely the span of a held breath. Then, almost tenderly, Beowulf offered a hand, as if guiding a dance partner to floor. Grendel accepted, curling talons around the offered wrist only to find the grip returning, unyielding. No shout rang, only the creak of joints, as though two great oaks had bent together in storm. Surprise widened in Grendel's gaze. He tried to wrench away, but Beowulf had wrapped his other arm about the monster's elbow, thumb digging for a secret hollow beneath sinew. They tilted, rolling like wrestlers on a dozy meadow. Yet every motion carried the weight of mountains. Benches slid aside in soft scrape. Sleeping warriors roused, confused by dream turned living. But Beowulf's men, trained, kept still, trusting their leaders packed with silence. Grendel flailed, legs striking hearthstone, claw raking beam. Yet Beowulf followed every buck and twist, guiding fury as a smith guides molten iron with tongs of purpose. To break the charm of invincibility, the Geatish hero sought a joint, that tender hinge where enchanted hide loosened its grip. His fingers found it in the creature's shoulder, deep beneath matted fur. Slowly he began to draw the arm away, outward, upward, the way a hall warden might open a heavy door to welcome first light. The monster's sinew groaned, a muffled rasp like rope under strain, and then something within gave a wet, fibrous tear, strangely subdued. One last wrench, and the arm came free, socket and sinew parting with reluctant hush. No scream filled the hall. Instead, a cavernous gasp escaped Grendel's chest, more shock than pain, as though he had been unmade where he least expected. Bleeding darkness rather than bright blood, the creature reeled backward. He did not howl. He merely stared at the new emptiness along his side, pressed claws of his remaining hand against the wound, and retreated. He passed once more through the ruptured doorway into moorland night, leaving only heavy droplets and the echo of his departing breath. The wind outside gathered those echoes and carried them across fen and heath, to the ear of every wakeful stone. Inside, quiet returned like dawn entering a shuttered room. Only the steady crackle of one stubborn ember remained, painting soft gold upon the grisly trophy Beowulf held. He studied the severed arm without triumph, as a healer might study a strange malady now cured. Around him, torches were lit with delicate care. Orange halos spread along the rafters, revealing the breadth of what had passed. Warriors rose, their faces a mixture of queasy awe and thankful wonder. Yet no cheer erupted. Voices floated scarcely above whisper, for the hall knew it had been host to shadow, and shadow, even when gone, leaves a lingering chill. At last, as torches steadied and straw was changed, Hrothgar himself entered, robe gathered against the lingering cold. Seeing his foe's limb displayed upon the high beam, the king's weathered features softened first with relief, then with reverent sorrow for knights previously lost. He spoke few words, merely pressing a broad palm to Beowulf's shoulder in silent gratitude. Servants washed the flagstones, wiped benches, and prepared a modest board. No loud feast stormed the hall. Only small bowls of clear broth and thin slices of winter apple, gentle fare for unsettled stomachs. When the first grey seam of early morning crept across the smoke hole, a scop unrolled his harp from its quiet leather wrap. He plucked a low chord, then another, letting each note hover before calling the next. His voice, when it joined the strings, felt older than either monster or king, yet it moved softly, like a river beneath winter ice. He sang of shields passed from father to son, of promises that outlast breath, and of one Geat who would meet darkness with open hands. The melody rose only as high as the rafters, never higher, as though mindful of those still nursing thoughts of the night. In that tempered praise the men of Heorot found both balm and balance. Hearts slowed, mouths relaxed, and the monstrous memory began to ease into the safer confines of story. Outside, the marshland winds turned, carrying away the final tang of fear. Inside, the scop's last chord faded into morning's hush, and the hall returned to quieter labors binding wounds, repairing doors, gathering splinters. Yet amid those simple tasks, every gaze that met the grisly arm secured upon the beam carried new steadiness, for that limp, furred length had become a promise that night could be met and mastered. So closed the reckoning of darkness in King Hrothgar's hall, a reckoning measured not by noise but by quiet resolve. And as the pale sun lifted beyond the eastern ridge, thoughts drifted toward the gifts and gentle counsel that daylight might bring when hero and king would speak together beneath calmer skies. Night once more unfolded its velvet shawl over the timbered hall of Heorot, where the scent of spilt mead still mingled with the iron-sweet trace of the monster's severed arm. In the dim rafters, quiet breath followed quiet breath, as warriors who had rejoiced too long drifted into rum-heavy slumber. The freshly hung trophy, wrapped in braided gold, swayed faintly in the draught, tapping against the beam like a pendulum marking the fragile peace now won. Moonlight lay pale on the benches, and the watchers at the door nodded, believing the threat had ebbed away with the broken creature's flight. But the marsh kept its own calendar of revenge, and while the sleep-bound hall drifted deeper into oblivion, a shape lifted itself from underground waters, carrying sorrow like a cloak of moss. The mother of Grendel, taller than tangling reeds, moved without ripple through night air, guided by pain, guided by the echo of her child's silent heart. Wooden doors sighed rather than shattered, and darkness slid inward on her heels. A single sentry woke half a breath too late. The talon that found him felt less like thunder than like winter closing around a flower, and Heorot dreamed on, rosy yet reluctant, uncovering on the flagstones a thin ribbon of water that smelled of distant fen. Men stirred, eyes widening at the absence of the severed arm, at the empty iron hook where triumph had hung, at the imprint of claws glistening upon the threshold. The slain sentinel lay folded as though in prayer, and sorrow spread from mouth to mouth like a hush in a church. King Hrothgar's aging gaze settled on the trail, pointing west, and he felt the old weight of feud heavier than any crown he had ever worn during his long reign. Beowulf listened, serene amid sorrow, and took upon himself the silent promise that had formed between hall and hero. Bronze plates were buckled, helmets lifted, and hoofbeats began their muted cadence across mist-white fields. Soft hills rolled past like dream waves, their grasses brushed silver by morning wind. At the rider's flank trotted young retainers bearing lithe ash spears, yet even their eager whispers lay low, for the marshlands ahead seemed to absorb every sound. At noon they reached the border where bright land ended, and a dark water sheet, restless and flecked with serpent foam, waited without welcome for them. From the rock-lined rim, the company peered into a basin darker than any cave, for here clouds stooped low and steam drifted upward as though the earth sighed. Pines leaned away, their roots clutching stone, and no bird dared cut the damp air with song. Against a ledge lay antlers of a stag that had fled to sacred water and found no refuge. Blood streaked the bank in rust-red threads that never dried. Hrothgar's counselors shivered, recalling tales of water-wives who wove nets of grief. But Beowulf stood quietly, absorbing the stillness as if drawing breath before music might begin. The hero loosened his mail, entrusted shining treasures to retainers, and declared that honor rather than armor would shield him. Below, yet Hrothgar, fearing for the youth whose courage rekindled an old man's hope, offered rings and fatherly counsel. Wine touched their cloaks with cooling fingers. On the lake's surface writhing shapes broke and vanished, leaving circles that widened like silent bells. A water dragon raised its plated brow, but retreated when Beowulf's calm glance met the creature's ancient eye. Then, securing his proven grip on the hilt of Runting, he stepped to the brink where roots hung like wet cords. Beneath the surface, opaque water folded over him, thick as pewter, closing off the upper world with scarcely a tremor. Downward he drifted, armored by resolve alone, while pale lights flickered in murk like lost stars. Reed forests brushed his shoulders. The tug of hidden currents slowed but could not sway him. At last a cavern mouth yawned, welcoming and terrible, and within it the mere wife waited, grief sharpening her outline. Beowulf lifted stalwart Run, the sword renowned for never-failing hand o' hearth, and swung. The blade, meeting eldritch skin, sighed, dulled, and fell away like a spent word. The weapon's silence echoed, deeper than any clamor. Water thickened into weight, pressing lungs and limbs, while the she-troll's arms coiled with the power of centuries unmarred. Stone pillars, remnants of a forgotten hall, loomed about them, their runes worn smooth by current and time. Beowulf, grappled and driven against the slabs, sensed the first thread of fatigue quiver across his shoulders, yet no fear found purchase. Instead, memory of foamy beaches and Geirblin, of laughing comrades and salt on the wind, steadied him. He rested free, seeking any glint of steel, but only shadows answered his searching hands. There caught cattle, though heavy beyond mortal reckoning, the sword seemed to await a worthy palm, and as Beowulf closed fingers round its whalebone hilt, the metal stirred with sleepy light. He raised the weapon. Water rolled aside as though paying gentle homage. The mother lunged anew, yet the giant edge answered her sorrow with one clean arc. Soundless beneath the waves, the stroke parted vertebrae and vengeance together, and peace floated up like a long-held breath at last. Soft luminance from the sunless blade lingered, revealing chamber walls lined with sea glass and nodding anemones. Upon a shelf of stone lay Grendel's ruined form, twisted yet strangely young, as though the nightmare had always been a lonely child in search of song. Beowulf, feeling neither wrath nor pride, severed the monster's head with tempered solemnity, for in death all quarrels quiet. The sword, having completed its ancient errand, began to melt. Rivulets of warm metal streamed down the hero's glove like icicles thawing at first thawing, leaving only the chased hilt as remembrance of giants' forgotten craft for men. Bearing that grim trophy, the Geat turned toward the tunnel mouth. The currents that once opposed him now eased, guiding his ascent like a slow elevator of water and light. Schools of dim fish glided past, unafraid, sensing the disturbance had calmed. Near the surface, the lake shivered, sunlight lancing through ragged clouds to reach him. When his brow broke into open air, the waiting shield-bearer sprang forward, yet his first act was to lay the hilt and head upon the grass, allowing the world a moment to acknowledge what the deep had relinquished in its slow, silver-flecked hush today. Together, warriors lashed a spear shaft through the severed head, for it was vast beyond reason, and 4 men labored to hoist the dripping weight. Their procession crossed heath and high, rode the windswept colors of afternoon sliding toward amber as they walked. Sheep on distant slopes lifted placid faces, then lowered them again, indifferent to human reckonings. At the hall the Danes gathered, drawn by rumor, and a sigh rose from the crowd when they witnessed the end of midnight terrors made visible. Torches were kindled, yet their flames seemed small beside the achieved silence carrying through timber corridors there. Hrothgar climbed the steps, age pressing gently upon each movement, and placed his hands upon Beowulf's shoulders. No feast hall cheer erupted. Instead, a mellow murmur of gratitude drifted like incense among rafters darkened by centuries of fire smoke. The king spoke sparingly, for wonder often steals words, and called the hero a balm sent by benevolent fates to soothe his people's aching nights. Queen Wili Theou set a golden cup by the giant hilt, a silent pledge that memory would be poured and shared for as long as benches were carved and songs remembered beneath the watchful eyes of calm winter starlight. That evening, as meat smoke curled in gentle spirals above the courtyard and harp strings hummed slow remembrances, Beowulf sat apart, gazing at embers that cracked only softly. His thoughts wandered toward the sea roads that would soon invite him home, toward his aging uncle, and toward destinies still tucked like seeds in dark furrows of time. Around him the Danes breathed easier. Yet the world beyond Heorot remained vast, holding triumphs and trials still veiled. Stars unfurled with deliberate grace, pinning night to heaven, and in their patient glimmer the next journey already stirred, noiseless and inevitable, within the hero's heart. Later, when fires sank to coals and the holes carved beasts glowed ruby along their varnished spines, a gentle snow began outside, whispering against shutter and roof, as though the sky itself meant to sing the company to rest. Beowulf rose, accepting a woolen cloak offered by a shy cupbearer, and walked the gallery where banners swayed in draftless hush. He paused beneath one linen strip depicting a ship, its prow cutting stylized waves. The image breathed of departures yet to come. of promise borne on oaken planks. And so the night concluded in quiet readiness for sail at dawn. Morning light drifted through the high rafters of the gilded hall, brushing the polished shields with a faint, forgiving glow, and the hush that followed the night of triumph lay over Heorot like fine-spun mist. Fires had dwindled to pale coals, the scent of pine smoke mingling with beeswax and mead, while warriors stirred gently upon benches, loath to break the fragile quiet their courage had bought. At the hall's center, the great helm of Grendel's dam still rested beside Beowulf's sword. Mute tokens of terror turned to memory. Hrothgar's gaze, mild yet deep as peat-fed waters, remained upon the Geat, and in that measured, tranquil dawn the next pattern of the saga began to weave itself. Slowly, as embers brightened and voices gathered, Hrothgar summoned his people to witness the proper passage of gifts. Gold from distant coasts, rings wrought with curling serpents, carven hilts agleam with garnet eyes, all were borne to Beowulf upon broad velvet cloths. Yet the greatest of the treasures was the king's own counsel, offered with the humility age sometimes grants to strength. He spoke of power's fleeting favor, of halls that crumble though timber be seasoned with silver, and of men who dare imagine that fortune has sworn a lifetime oath. The riches, he said, were only mirrors. May they reflect gratitude rather than pride, memory rather than boast. He then asked the hall to hear one final teaching, and the hush returned as though every plank had ears. Once ruled no less proudly than he, yet in the height of splendor forgot that flesh is driftwood on the tide of years. A sickness settled, the sword arm weakened, and the bright torches of his following guttered in an instant. So must each helm be lowered, each breastplate pierced, not by iron but by the quiet certainty that endings are woven into beginnings. Treasure, triumph, children's cheers all are sweet, but sweetest is the knowledge that no sweetness lingers forever, and that acceptance is its own unbreakable shield. Beowulf listened, broad shoulders bowed, not in shame, but in thoughtful ease, and the words settled upon him, like calm snow, melting slowly into resolve. Outside, sparrows cuffed the early breeze, and the Danes, accustomed to louder farewells, sensed that silence served better than song. Arms were clasped, helms were shined for the journey, and the once haunted hall watched its deliverer depart without fanfare, trusting that memory alone would furnish music enough. Hrothgar, standing upon the threshold, lifted a hand and spoke no further, for all that mattered had already been given. The rest belonged to water and wind. Down at the dune-edged shore the Geatish vessel waited, its curved prow dark against the pale morning glare. Sailcloth was folded, its flaxen breath smelling of sun-bleached cordage and old storms. Beside it lay the bundles of bright booty, careful knots guarding glimmering plates and cupfuls of rubied wine. The crew moved among these hoards with simple grace, neither grasping nor gawking, for sea roads demand obedience to order if they are to guide men home. When the last latch clicked and the mooring rope was loosed, the hull slid forward like a sigh, and Heorot dwindled behind breakers that mumbled of both grief and gratitude, veiling the sun and mother of pearl. Gulls traced pale loops above the mast, falling now and again upon floating silver fish, yet their cries softened with distance, as though respectful of the quiet aboard. Beowulf stood near the stern, one hand resting on the hollow wolf's head carved there by his father's friend. Salt wind combed his hair, and memory combed his mind. He thought of the king's warning and of his own sinews, still unscarred by age, and wondered which would fail first, the force in his arms or the foretelling in those words. Night upon open water unfolded like ink across vellum pricked by stars. The ship rode a leisurely swell, and the creak of its ribs mingled with the hush of oars pulled inside the gunwale. Crewmen dozed in shifts, cloaks heavy with salt, while Beowulf, wakeful, traced constellations his mother had taught him, reading in their stillness a quieter saga than any skald could shape. He found the worm coiled about the pole of heaven, and the swan, forever gliding yet never arriving. Between them hung the hollow place reserved for deeds undone, and into that hush he let his breath subside. After 3 unhurried days, the spray grew sweeter, tinged with heather and distant pine, and the low line of Geatland rose like a muted green chorus along the border of sea and sky. Watchmen atop the grey headlands sighted the wolf-proud craft and sent messengers slipping over moor and meadow toward Hygelac's seat. Farmers paused in hayfields, shading eyes, while children pointed from sheepfold gates, unsure whether the returning sails belonged to saga or man. The ship eased into the natural harbor where river and tide share the task of welcoming wanderers, and its keel kissed the familiar sand with a sound like a mother's breath, soft, patient, and sure. And the Queen Hygd, calm as winter moonlight, arranged benches with her own hands, setting woven blankets so no warrior's mail would chill to the touch. When Beowulf crossed the threshold, the hush he carried from Denmark settled there as well, thinning the usual roar to a reverent murmur. Hygelac rose towering, tawny, bearded, and clasped his kinsman close, feeling on those broad shoulders the whisper of distant peril overcome. No trumpet marked the meeting. Instead, small harp notes wandered through the rafters like drifting petals, and welcome took the shape of warmth rather than noise. When the first round of modest gladness had rippled away, Beowulf had the Danish treasures unfolded before the throne. One by one he named their makers, their metals, their histories, never claiming credit, always tracing the shining path of kinship that had conveyed each piece from forge to feast. He gifted a golden standard, taller than any man, its cloth hammered with sleeping dragons. To Hygd he offered the gleaming necklace once worn by Wealhtheow, a circlet fashioned to cradle light. For the thanes he poured coins like mellow rain across a laden table. Even the ship's prow, detached with careful carpentry, would be set into the hall's high gable as token of the voyage. That evening the hall breathed with a tempered contentment as platters of bright river fish and bowls of wild lingonberries passed from hand to hand in unhurried rhythm. Stories sprouted, but none were shouted. Instead they unfurled like low smoke, drifting toward the rafters to mingle with harp strings and the hush of embers. Beowulf spoke only when invited, recounting the combat beneath the mere in measured phrases, sparing no detail of the strange hall of the deep, yet placing equal weight upon the old king's warning, suddenly aware that lungs are leased, not owned. Before the hearth was banked for night, Hygd set a simple cup of honeyed milk before Beowulf, a gesture of kin rather than queen. They spoke in murmurs that scarcely stirred the air of his mother's kindness, of her hopes for the young, of the weave between sorrow and solace that keeps halls from silence. Nothing decided, nothing demanded, only the sense that courage is nourished not solely by battle, but by small mercies guarded in remembered rooms. When the milk was gone, they parted with a nod, carrying a warmth no metal could imitate. Later, long after the last lamp had been doused, the fire's slow heart hummed beneath its skin of ash, and Beowulf sat awake, watching sparks circle the chimney mouth like tiny, tethered stars. Somewhere beyond the barrows, unseen in the layered dark, an old dragon guarded ancient gold, its coils tightening each season as hoard and hatred grew together. The Geat could not know the shape of that sleeping shadow, yet in the hush between sparks, he felt an echo of hot breath upon forthcoming years, and the king's sermon, quiet as clothed steel, returned to mind with a chill both dim and deep. Still, beyond the windows, a hush of dew was forming over fields ripe with barley, and the slow pulse of river against pilings promised another dawn unsullied by omen. Within that promise, the warriors yielded to sleep, shields beneath their heads, dogs curled near the doors, while moonlight painted every blade and buckle the color of bleached bone. Thus the whole drifted toward the gentle gray of morning, unaware that fortune, like the tide, has no loyalty but motion. For now Geatland rested in quiet completeness, yet far seams of fate were stirring, and the story's loom paused only long enough to draw a silent, measured breath. The last glow of twilight still lingered above the whale road where Beowulf's oar-scarred ship had slipped toward home, its hull heavy with Danish gold and half-forgotten songs. Behind the hero, wind and water sealed the pathway to Hrothgar's realm, and the hush that followed victory spread like a calming tide across Geatish shores. It was upon that gentle hush that the next tale unfurled, as shimmering gifts were unladen beneath pine rafters, and the mead hall's hearth sighed with newfound warmth. Yet within the braided smoke of celebration drifted the faintest scent of change, as though the quieting waves themselves sensed that peace, like moonlight, can vanish at first light. In those untroubled days, King Hygelac still sat upon the throne, broad-shouldered and laughing, a generous guardian whose boastful youth had mellowed into thoughtful rule. Beowulf, content to stand at his uncle's side, let the gold rings he had earned glimmer quietly upon his arm rather than upon his tongue. He spoke little of Grendel or the Maya-born mother, preferring instead to guide young warriors through silent exercises at dawn, the dew brimming upon heather as though the earth itself listened. Around him the Geats flourished. Trade routes widened, forges brightened, and distant jarls sent tokens of respect. It seemed that the tale might settle forever into this gentle pattern, the loom of fate weaving only well-tempered threads. But far beyond wooden palisades and clustered farmsteads, other tides were turning. News came of Frankish restlessness along the southern rivers, rumor braided with fear. Hygelac, loyal to allies who begged his spear, gathered a swift-sailing host and set out across grey channels, leaving Beowulf in charge of Hearthwatch until his return. Storm clouds mounted, ravens wheeled. On a mist-choked morning, the Geatish sails were sighted no more, and soon battered survivors limped home with tidings hard as iron. The king had fallen amid a ring of shields, his war-shirt split by foreign steel, his last cry for courage swallowed by the clash of nations. With that breath, the measured hush within Geatland cracked, and grief, slow and icy, crept through every doorway. Hood, the widowed queen, laid her husband beneath a barrow near the sea, where salt wind could forever mingle with his memory. Torches lined the slope, their flames bending like mourning women, and Beowulf bore the hoard-bright collar that Hygelac had once placed around his neck, setting it atop the mound in wordless promise. Custom named Heorot, Hygelac's only son, as next to sit upon the high seat, and so the youth, untested and hopeful, took the carved ash staff of office. Beowulf, though pressed by veteran warriors to claim dominion himself, bowed low, offering loyalty rather than rivalry. In the hush that followed the oath, Hygd's weary eyes glistened, sensing how swiftly kindness can become the surest shield a realm may raise. Seasons drifted, carrying with them both harvest, song, and hush. Heorot listened well to counsel, yet destiny, impatient with gentle hearts, soon placed a harsh burden upon his brow. Two young princes of Sweden, exiled by their uncle Onela, sought shelter at the Geatish court, and Heorot, shaped by mercy, offered them refuge. It was a decision wrought from light, but it drew storm. Onela descended with mailed men and glimmering spears, riverside fields trembling beneath their march. The clash that followed was brief, yet bitter. Winter-pale blades, hoofbeats, and sudden silence. When dawn bled over the heather, Heorot lay mortally cut, his blood pooling among crushed clover. Beowulf lifted the fading king's head, and the youth's last breath fluttered like a moth before stillness settled. With that sigh, the line of succession snapped once more. In the hush after battle, the Geatish elders gathered within the smoke-cured hall, their faces drawn like old maps, every wrinkle marking a lost friend. They turned toward Beowulf, their warrior of wonder tales, and asked that he take up the braided circlet and steady the shaken people. 3 times he refused, for his mind still dwelt upon wave spray and open paths, rather than the patient labors of rule. Yet motherless children waited for winter stores, and border stones needed guarding. At last he accepted, not with exultation, but with a quiet nod, mindful that crowns are fashioned as much from sorrow as from gold. Thus a new era unfolded, its first notes neither trumpet nor drum, but the steady heartbeat of duty newly embraced. Years flowed onward like a broad, unhurried river, and soon 5 decades had glimmered beneath Beowulf's prudent hand. No mead-hall rafters collapsed beneath riot, no village fires went unfed. Rather, embassies came bearing carved tusk and woven silks, and feuds once etched in frost were softened by measured words. The king traveled seldom, yet when he did, his presence quieted quarrels before swords could finish waking. He judged disputes with calm humor, remembering the brittle cost of wrath, and because he respected the old stones of neighboring realms, their rulers in turn respected the low hum of Geatish forge and field. Peace, once a fragile reed, thickened into sturdy willow. Under its shade, children learned songs that spoke more of seed time than of siege, and elders found that their final winters tasted kindly of honeyed mead rather than smoke. All the while Beowulf honored the ancient duty of the ring-giver. Whenever the harvest god braced the fields, the king opened cedar-lidded coffers and let bright armlets slide into calloused palms. He remembered the sting of exile and the thrill of welcome, and so he ensured that the wanderer, the widow, and the smith who sang over his anvil each received more than mere coin. They received belonging. Feasts were held without swagger. Instruments whispered rather than roared. And yet the simple harmony of clinking cups carried farther than any boastful horn. Empty-handed men left the hall with silver at their belts and gentle purpose in their lungs. Treasure, in such seasons, became as light as autumn dandelion fluff, scattering goodwill across valleys the king himself might never tread. Yet even willow peace cannot keep away the quiet footfall of years. Beowulf, once lithe as riverlight, felt a tempered drag in his sword arm when he practiced at dawn. The color of frost settled within his beard, and the laugh lines beside his eyes deepened like hollowed shells on a long-used shore. At evening councils he listened more than spoke, gaze drifting toward unseen horizons, as though hearing something the young could not. Some nights the hearth fire snapped a note too sharp, and his hand, unbidden, reached for a phantom hilt. In dreams, whale-road winds returned, smelling of brine and fate. Waking, he would walk the ramparts alone, counting stars no skald had named, sensing patterns in their pale weaving. Though no enemy stirred, a hush of portents gathered, softer than snow yet undeniable. He recalled the riddling words of the coast guard who first hailed him in Denmark, the wisdom of Hrothgar, and the sorrow etched upon Wealhtheow's lowered brow. Each memory felt now like a bead upon an unseen thread, drawing taut towards some unknown design. So Beowulf began to set his house in order with the same quiet care he once reserved for whetting blades. He spoke to Egils of distant timber supplies, to Aslaf of trading posts farther west, and to Wiglaf, bright-eyed and earnest, about the many meanings of courage. He reinforced borders, not with armies, but with goodwill, sending seed grain to valley farmers, whose crops had failed. At night he stacked scrolls of lineage beside carved chests of amber, ensuring that knowledge, not merely treasure, would remain should sudden darkness descend. One late summer dusk found the king upon a cliff top where seabirds wheeled against crimson vapor. The sun, lowering like a great molten coin, kindled the water into a mirror of restless fire. Beowulf's cloak pressed gently against his aging frame, and in that hush he sensed beneath the brilliance something hidden, like a coal beneath ash, awaiting breath. Far below, waves murmured over secret hoards of ageless stone, and farther still, in the deep dark of forgotten barrows, something stirred, though only the gulls seemed to notice, shifting uneasily before settling again. The king watched until color drained from sky and sea alike, leaving only the cool gray of iron yet to be forged. Then he turned back toward the golden hall, footsteps measured, heartbeat calm, the fragile stillness of the moment folded carefully within his thoughts. So the season ripened and drifted, and Geatland slumbered beneath harvest moons, unaware that a single spark, sheltered in shadow and scale, waited to wake. For now, only the hush of orchards, the slow creak of barn doors, and the murmur of distant surf filled the air, yet destiny, like embers deep in oak logs, glowed unseen. Soon a hidden fire would breathe, testing the mettle of an aging king. But in this moment, the night remained soft, and the stars held their breaths high above the quiet meadows awaiting dawn, yet unseen. Late summer starlight still shimmered upon the whale roads when the hush that had closed the previous tale drifted into the king's golden hall. For half a century peace had lain over Gatland like a silken cloak, its folds brushed by harvest wind, its edges embroidered with children's laughter, yet peace, like silk, may fray in secret places. In that gentlest hour before dawn, calm lingered upon meadows and moors, and the seasoned warriors slept beneath carved roof beams, unaware that the slow heart of old stone was beginning to stir. Beyond the ring of farmsteads, a ridge rose where heather clung to ancient rubble. Deep under that ridge, a barrow coiled around treasures, hoarded in elder ages, helmets hammered to mirror morning, hilts of reddened gold, trays of swirling garnet and jet. At the center of the mound, in a chamber scorched black by forgotten forges, a dragon lay wrapped in its own knowing, a living knot of ember and coil. It had watched kingdoms bud, bloom, and crumble. It had weighed desire in the tilt of every sunrise. It had grown so attuned to its trove that no breath disturbed the seams of treasure without blowing across its tender soul. One night, hunger on two legs found the entrance. A runaway bondsman, pale with fear of mortal masters, scrabbled through a fissure veiled by broom and briar. His lantern was a trembling leaf of light against walls that still hummed with smith song. Panic made him quick. He lifted a flagon gilt with twisted serpents. Just one cup, no more, and he fled, footsteps tapping a hollow drum along passages the dragon had mapped with instinct. Behind him the gloom resettled, but one measure of brightness was gone, and the space where it had rested felt as raw as torn bark. Legends worn smooth by word of mouth often paint dragons in singular strokes of menace, yet older root myths whisper subtler lines. Paleolithic hearth fires have shed shapes of coiling smoke that rose twisted and seemed to claim the sparks. River mist has unrolled like scaly hide across morning marsh. From Vedic serpents circling cosmic seas to Levantine leviathans who guard the edge of dawn, the dragon serves as ward and weigher, hoarder and herald, keeper of thresholds between what is kept and what must pass. In that hoard barrow it guarded not only metal but memory, every hammered ring, a reminder that toil, triumph, and time itself may be melted down, recast, and lost again. So the absence of a single goblet echoed louder than war horns. The dragon's eyelids, thin veils of mineral glitter, peeled apart. Within the skull, thoughts unfurled, like banners revealing old runic scrolls. Protect avenge, purge. A tremor ran down spines of age-hardened bone, and with the tremor came heat. First a breath, then a rumble, then a roar mute to living ears yet thunderous in the stones. Sparks budded along its sides, and the chamber's shadows shivered, drawn outward as wings of wrath spread under the cairn's crown. When the mound cracked, it did so quietly, a loosened pebble. A sigh of powdered chalk yet night air rushed inside like a bellows, granting the creature a fresh lungful of wind. It rose through a veil of dislodged sod, bearing a comet's tail of cinder. Under the honest moon, its scales took the color of river iron streaked with smoldering crimson. The barrow behind it remained, but the linchpin of secrecy had been pulled. The dragon's heart, long banked, blazed open. In the valleys below, shepherds felt warmth chasing their wool-clad backs and mistook it for an unseasonable breeze. Then the warmth sharpened. Flocks bleated in startled unison. Reed-thatched roofs, cured against rain yet dry as tinder, sighed up tongues of flame. The dragon's glide was slow, almost stately, but every yaw of its head released a furnace hiss. Soot spiraled in gentle eddies before settling like midnight snow across gardens of barley. By dawn, rose-gold light mingled with a copper haze, and nothing sounded louder than the crackle of beams collapsing into ash. Old women who remembered Beowulf's youthful triumphs looked out from doorways darkened by smoke and thought, with sorrow rather than surprise, that the world's scales were tilting again. Children clutched wooden toys that wilted in the heat, and somewhere under charred rafters, a lyre's strings sang their last, warping into silence. Geatland's tranquility, so long tended, now lay bruised beneath skyfolds stained amber and umber. Messengers rode through drifting sparks to reach the king's hall at Hefnishold. There, beneath great arches shaped like whale ribs, Beowulf listened. Time had silvered the beard that once caught surf spray, yet his eyes retained the deep-water focus of a man who has measured himself against darkness and found the measure sound. Around him elder retainers gathered, their shields stacked in mute rings. They spoke with the rhythm of veteran oaks trading wind-born wisdom, of omens carved upon night clouds, of the ancient pact between ruler and realm, of how greed, whether in beast or man, fans grief for all. One counselor recalled half-forgotten carvings on a standing stone, twin serpents biting their own tails, encircling runes that warned of treasure gained without tribute paid. Another reflected upon Sigmund, dragon slayer of earlier lays, whose fame shone bright, yet whose fate twisted into obscurity, as though dragon fire brands even the victorious. They pondered the peril of wielding youth's courage with age's bones, and weighed whether armies, not single champions, should answer the blaze. The hall's candle smoke swirled slowly toward rafters, braiding thought with breath. Beowulf remained still, amid the murmurs as though listening for something older than voices. Perhaps the pulse of destiny stepping softly across the mead bench floor. At length, when quiet settled, he spoke. His words were even, free of boast, shaped less by will than by necessity. He recounted the prowling grief visible in burned villages, the lineage of duty handed from king to kingdom, and the fragile bloom of peace he had watched grow through 5 glowing decades. He rose, and in that unhurried movement memories of past feats glimmered, the underwater grapple with Grendel's dam, the dusk-lit duel at Heorot, the voyage across winds beaten into submission. Yet age neither shackled nor oversharpened his resolve. It had simply distilled it, like mead settling into clarified amber. His mind wandered toward his burial mound promised upon coastal bluffs, and he wondered, without sadness, whether its stones were already waiting to be warmed by morning sun. The thought was folded away, ceremonial and calm. The elders pressed him to leading a war band, to set wooden shields like overlapping tiles against fire. But Beowulf saw further. Dragon flame licked not merely timber but spirit. Only a single focused will could wedge itself between the creature's fury and the folk's frailty. Too many blades would crowd the space, sharpen fear, distort the song of battle. He remembered how sword edges had faltered against the Grendel brood, and how victory had come from the raw meeting of sinew and fate. Thus he declared his intent. He would face the worm alone, save for the shield-bearer who must uphold custom by witnessing the contest, heart steady as an anvil stone. Armorers brought out corselets linked like river fish, still bright where sparks had not kissed them. They laid before him a towering shield of iron oak, overlaid with forged plates, built to withstand a gust seething with stars. He handled the famed sword Naegling, its pattern-welded veins shimmering like frost on dawn's first reed. Yet he knew metal alone could not cure the wound scorching his kingdom. The cure must be found where valor, patience, and the quiet acceptance of mortality entwine. As preparations took shape, the king stepped beyond the hall into dusk that smelled faintly of rain cooling scorched earth. He tasted wood smoke on the breeze. It carried tales of loss, but also of renewal, for ash sinks into soil and feeds next season's seed. Far off, the barrow's ridge pulsed with a dim, sullen glow, like a forge left banked in the care of sleepless ghosts. Under that glow, Beowulf imagined the dragon curled once more around its hollowed wealth, nostrils seething with the memory of intrusion. Two sentinels awaited each other, one of scale and ember, one of flesh tempered by days. Stars opened like small, silent promises. The Geatish king, satisfied the council had been honored and resolve quietly sealed, withdrew to the small chamber where wise men kept herbs for calm and salves for burn. He allowed himself few words, sharing simple instructions for the realm should morning not repeat his heartbeat. Then he dismissed ceremony and lay in brief rest, breathing in steady measure, as though synchronizing his pulse with the slow cadence of the earth itself. Yet beneath every closing eyelid stories continued to unfurl. Around Geatland, villagers gathered embers from ruined hearths and drew them together into new fires. They found comfort in shared labor, the soft clink of pottery against well stones, the communal weaving of thatch to roof tomorrow's shelter. They whispered not of despair, but of steadfast waiting, trusting that the king who had weathered storms beyond counting would once more meet the world's fierce mystery and bend it, if only for a while, toward mercy. In the dim stillness before dawn, a lone raven lifted from the hall's gable, circling thrice before gliding toward the ridge. Its wings cut a graceful figure between purple upper sky and the bruised blue frontier of hills, as though carrying tidings no human tongue could phrase. Below, armor clasps clicked softly, more like chimes than chains. When first light tinged horizon, Beowulf stepped forward, helm under arm, serenity around his shoulders like a cloak woven from remembered victories and unspoken farewells. The path to the dragon's barrow awaited, neither hurried nor hindered. Along that path, dew-soaked boots, spider threads gleamed silver, and the scent of char faded under rising notes of pine. Each footfall marked the meeting of what had been and what must be, and the morning air, though cool, contained a quiet warmth, as though the sun itself offered modest benediction to both challenger and charged guardian of gold. Soon ridge and barrow would stand full in view, their profiles cut against sky in stark silhouette. But for now, the tale rests upon the gentle arc of anticipation. In the next telling, sparks shall meet flesh, oath shall meet flame, and a king's final measure will be taken in the hush between heartbeats. Night had deepened over the headland where the dragon's final plume faded into stars, and the charred timbers of Beowulf's hall glowed like a resting coal. The sea had fallen to a hush, broken only by occasional pops of pitch as beams settled, and the scent of smoked pine drifted inland, on a breeze still warm from the earlier blaze. From that muted ember the story moves onward, as gently as a wave that scarcely lifts the sand it strokes. In a sandy hollow the aging king built a forge beneath the patient gaze of constellations he had steered by in younger days. Cartwheels, driftwood, and broken spear shafts fed the newborn flame. Stones closed around the brightness like silent advisors forming a ring of counsel. Sparks lifted, painting gray beards, scarred cheeks, and the careful frown of a warrior who, though wearied by years, still understood the conversation of mettle. Beowulf worked the bellows himself, steady rhythm in his one good shoulder, drawing the coals to a color that reminded every watcher of dawn over the whale road. Into that living heart he set a disk of rough ore recovered from ancient spoil, and under slow, deliberate strokes the metal widened, thinned, and answered. Each ringing blow recalled earlier anvils, the clang inside Hrothgar's gold-lit hall, the sharper music of a long ship's deck where rivets were teased into place, the jubilant note when Grendel fell. Memory became rhythm, and rhythm shaped a shield, round and broad as the moon that hovered above the cliff. Near midnight the disk was quenched in seawater. Steam rose in sudden clouds, veiling the king and his work, so that, for heartbeat long, he seemed already part of legend. The vapor mingled salt, iron, and the faint sweetness of alder chips, a perfume older than kingdoms. Beowulf traced the pebbled face. It answered with a muted thrum, promising steadfastness without boasting. A leather strap was fixed, balance tested, and the weight settled on his arm like a long-kept promise heavy, yet familiar, as though it had waited half a century to complete his silhouette. At dawn he gathered his retainers amid pale mist that blurred horizon and tide, making helms look like islands adrift on early light. They stood in a ragged crescent, 60 men and more, each carrying recollections of winter marches, mead hall revelry, and the quiet peace that follows a campaign well won. He spoke with quiet gratitude of shared cups, of roads trudged under sleet, of watchfires that had brightened the darkest of solstice nights. Glory, he said, burns fast. Honor endures when gold is gone, and kindness is the only coin that refuses tarnish. Should shadow claim him, they were to shelter the people, settle disputes wisely, and guard the hearth where story and song are kept alive. He asked no one to follow, yet left the choice open, the way a spring waits in hidden stone until pressure and seasons set it free. A long pause followed, as soft as linen drifting on laundry lines. It seemed a scent, yet nerves ticked beneath polished mail, and doubts gathered like mist inside helmets. When the dragon's subterranean roar rolled across the slope deep, resonant, vibrating within the rib spears, wavered. Weapons were sheathed, excuses murmured. The king might wish the glory alone. Omens seemed troubled. Shields required mending. Foot by foot many drifted into the consoling trees, their departure hidden by fern, their absence explained by silence. Only one figure remained. Wiglaf, scarcely more than a youth, remembered winter evenings when Beowulf had guided his hand along a grindstone, teaching him to wait for the faint high note that tells when metal sings true. That kindness, given without witnesses or ceremony, bound him more firmly than treasure. He thought of his father's sword, cracked pommel mended with rawhide, and of the old king's confidence that even humble steel could shine if tended with patience. Feeling the stitch of loyalty hold, he followed without speaking, boots crunching softly on frost-silvered grass. Their pace matched as if the older man's stride cast a shadow the younger could inhabit armor, rustling through gorse scented of resin and honey, petals shaking loose as they brushed past. The track climbed, winding between granite outcrops, where lichen glowed pale green. Stones cracked with ancient heat at the barrow mouth. Smoke curled round the new iron shield in cautious tendrils. testing it the way a cat tests a stranger's hand. Inside, treasure glimmered like trapped daylight chalices, whose stems were fretworked like frost, torques resting in coils, battle standards whose fabric, though moth-eaten, still held a whisper of marched miles, coils layered like dark shingles, scales clinking like wind chimes heard from afar. Fire brightened behind its jaws, unfurling in luminous billows that flowed over the floor and licked at the ceiling in silent fountains of heat. The shield held the first wave, glowing a dusky orange. Beowulf's ash spear darted forward and lodged beneath a ridged plate. Wood cracked, sparks flew, scent of charred sap rising. A second wash spilled round the rim and singed his beard. Yet he stood like an oak in storm, roots buried deep in Geatish soil. Through the shimmering veil of heat he glimpsed the dragon's eye ember red, oddly sorrowful, and felt no hatred, only necessity. Quiet resolve turned Wiglaf into motion. He stepped through the narrowing space, blade high, the geometry of his swing calm, almost tender, as if he parted curtains rather than flesh. Metal met membrane with a low tear. Dark blood hissed on stone, scent sharp as rain on iron. The dragon reared, torn between fury and pain. In that tilting instant Beowulf saw the path. The ancient sword he bore old enough to remember giants slid past, shattered scales, and found the molten pulse within. The beast quivered, exhaled a fading gust that smelled of embers, and folded upon its hoard with a sound like settling earth. Stillness returned, broken by the ping of cooling mail. The shield slipped from Beowulf's grip and rang once on stone, a small bell of release whose echo touched every corner of the cavern. Heat had found a seam at his throat. Blood welled, bright as rowan berries against bronze. Wiglaf dropped to his knees, cutting away straps, pressing linen torn from his own tunic. But the wound was already a river seeking sea. Beowulf asked to behold the treasure, not for greed, but to be certain that danger was ended and his people made safe. Wiglaf carried armfuls of goblets and banners, arranging them so their reflected light washed over the dying king's face. In that mellow glow, the features that had once terrified monsters softened into something almost childlike, as though he listened to a lullaby, remembered from cradle days. He spoke of the mound to be raised beside the sea, high enough for sailors to use as beacon, shining with white stones so birds might nest along its ledges. He spoke of Wiglaf's coming stewardship, of courage tempered by mercy, of the fragile lineage of oaths that runs from elder to youth, like a quiet stream beneath frost, breath-shortened, words thin to wisps, yet still he managed a final blessing spoken in a tongue older than borders before the old hero slipped outward, gentle as a tide withdrawing under new-risen moon. Wiglaf knelt long after the pulse ceased, listening to the hush, the ticking of coins settling, and the steady surf beyond. A smoky beam of sun pierced the barrow and touched the king's unmoving hand, gilding it for a heartbeat. Outside, gulls wheeled across a pewter sky. Below, the shamed retainers shifted among trees, uneasy at what they would soon confess. Soon word must travel, pyre wood must be chosen. Songs must be shaped in meters worthy of the life just spent. Those labors belong to the next turning of the tale. For now, the headland lies quiet, gull-feather soft, cradling the memory of a king while the sea keeps its slow, ancient rhythm against the shore. Across the water, far beyond sight, mariners will one day glimpse the barrow's pale crown and speak his name in quiet wonder. Children not yet born will feel courage rise as softly as dawn when the saga is recited beside homely hearths. But that, like the gathering of oak and the weaving of the funeral cloth, belongs to tomorrow. Tonight, moonlight lingers on cooling scales, on the steadfast shield, on two sets of footprints that lead back toward the muted glow of dawn. And somewhere in the hush between waves, the faint ring of hammer on anvil seems to echo again, reminding hillside and horizon alike that courage, once shaped, continues to resonate, long after the hand that forged it has grown still. High above, the constellations wheel on, tracing the same patient arcs they followed when Beowulf was young, and their silent turning promises that though flames fade and voices quiet, the pattern of the heroic heart will return with every season. So it rests. As the last tremor of the dragon's fading firelight ebbed, dusk curled around the silent crest of Heroneses. In that cooling gloom, the Geatish warriors gathered in uneven rings, breaths shallow, hearts caught between relief and regret. Their lord lay nearby, resting against the mound he had conquered, strength seeping away like warmth from smoldering ash. The dragon's hoard glimmered faintly within the breached barrow, coins and goblets gleaming with mute malevolence, each treasure steeped in ancient oaths and unspoken sorrow. No triumphant shout rose. Instead, low breaths mingled with drifting smoke, and the night listened in solemn stillness. Wiglaf, faithful kinsman, moved softly among the glistening relics, his torch revealing a strange procession of marvels. An iron-bound standard scored by forgotten wars. A necklace of amber moistened by dripping cave. Water, shields chased with runes that circled like coiled serpents. And at the heap's foundation, yet for every shimmering delight, there lurked a shadowed tale. Brothers betrayed, halls burnt, vows broken. The hoard was rich. Oh. Beowulf, hearing the soft clink of metal, asked for a glimpse, and Wiglaf carried a handful to his weakening king. Gold pooled like pale dawn across the warrior's mail, lighting lines of age upon his brow. He studied the trove without craving, seeing at last what time had been waiting to show him. That wealth, unyoked from generosity, becomes nothing more than weighted silence. A faint smile traced his lips, brittle yet serene. In that hush, he voiced his final will, words floating like autumn leaves upon cool water. First, he entrusted the Geats with the sad abundance, commanding that every coin and carven jewel be brought forth and seen in daylight, not to kindle greed, but to remind the living of the passing price of pride. Then, mindful of sea winds and salt-bright horizons that had cradled his youth, he asked for a tower to be raised at the headland, high enough that sailors might sight it and remember that courage once kindled can guide even after death. Lastly, he spoke of his people, hoping peace might follow in gentle measure, though he sensed the brittle edge of tomorrow's storms. With each request given, his breathing slowed, not in fear, but in quiet accord with the darkening sky. Night deepened, while the Geats fashioned a bier of woven branches, moss-soft and fragrant. They lifted their lord once more, not to battle, but to the gentle summit of his final ridge. Pine resin shimmered beneath torch glow, and sparks drifted upward like aimless fireflies. They worked in calm cadence, each movement part of a wider hymn, older than any song. Far below, the dragon's cavern remained open, its cursed ornaments untouched, as though the earth itself pondered whether to swallow them again. Dawn came hesitant, filtering through a gauze of sea-born mist. In this pale interval between endings and beginnings, 12 chosen champions rode to the high bluff, bearing timber, tar, and sorrow. They raised the pyre tier upon tier, heartwood stacked with deliberation, each plank a muted farewell. At the summit, they laid their king amid helm and hauberk, sword at his side, banner folded across his breast. No clang of iron broke the air. Instead, gulls called distantly, their voices washed thin by the mournful tide. Before flame touched wood, an aged woman, hair white as winter heather, stepped forward. She had once served mead within the hall, humming bright lays to soften warriors' hearts. Now her throat gathered a darker music. She lifted her face to the awakening sky and sang a dirge, low and tremulous, woven with echoes of seas yet to storm, spears yet to splinter, and hearths that would soon stand cold. Her lament traced the brittle line between valor and survival, reminding all who listened that a hero's brightness may dazzle the moment, yet leave shadows for those who remain. When her song ebbed, Wiglaf kindled the fire. Flames rose with deliberate grace, first pale blue, then gold, finally deep crimson. They wrapped the mailed figure gently, consuming not with haste but with ancient patience. Resin cracked like distant rain, and a scent of juniper drifted over the mourning company, soothing though tinged with finality. Sparks spiraled upward, mingling with morning light, so that for a little while it was hard to know whether the sky wept embers or the pyre exhaled dawn. While the fire labored, the 12 riders circled the mound, hoofbeats muffled on dew-damp turf. They spoke in turn, recounting deeds familiar and faint, each recollection a stone placed upon growing cairns of memory. None boasted, none begrudged. Their voices merely wove another layer of warmth around loss, the way a mother tucks a blanket against gathering cold. By midday the pyre sank, embers settling into a quiet red hollow. Over that heart of heat the Geats raised stones hauled from cliff and shoreline, building the tower their lord had imagined. They mortared with sand and lime, but also with stories, murmuring as they worked, so that each echo of hammer held a memory. Days slipped gently one into another, gulls wheeling above, waves polishing pebbled beaches. In that patient labor, grief found a rhythm, and rhythm lent release. When the tower stood finished, tall and round against the blue, they sealed within its hollow waste the cursed gold. A final rite of fire cleansed what could be cleansed, yet the Geats chose not to spend that wealth, nor to scatter it across their fields. Instead they walled it away, a silent ledger of human longing, sealed where the wind might whisper through narrow slits and keep it restless. Thus the treasure remained present, yet powerless, memorial and warning together. In evenings that followed, fishermen far offshore would lift their gaze to the lantern set atop the stone crown, and by its glow tell once more of the warrior king who had tamed both monster and flame. Yet within those retellings another current ran, gentle but insistent, the notion that bravery shines brightest when it serves more than the brave. Beowulf had fought for glory, yes, but also for hearth and kin. Still, in the quiet left behind, folk wondered whether a single hero's might could ever shelter an entire people from the long winters of fate. The woman's dirge lingered like sea mist, asking without accusation how courage and community might learn to move as one. Children playing near the headland would sometimes pause, sensing the hush that clings to sacred places. They placed small shells at the tower's base, their simple offerings answering the ancient gold with harmless gifts of tide and time. In that gesture the balance tilted slightly toward hope, suggesting that while heroes blaze, it is the many quiet hands that build tomorrow. And so life, cautious yet persistent, threaded itself once more through the green valleys and alder groves of Geatland. Wiglaf would climb the tower alone. From that height he watched long ridges fall toward the sea, and he considered the fragile seam that joins memory to desire. He understood that swords grow dull, that renown erodes like cliff-face stone, yet also that stories carefully tended can outlast iron. Above him gulls wheeled, their wings catching late light, so each bird appeared a brief sliver of silver, echoing treasures now sealed below. In that quiet union of sky and earth, a fading hero and steadfast folk, the young lord found his purpose, not to eclipse his mentor, but to guard the space in which ordinary lives might thrive. And so the season turned, leaves bronzing then loosening in crisp spirals. The tower weathered rain and morning frost, standing as patient as any star. Travelers paused beside its stonework, tracing grooves where lime met granite, feeling the faint hum of remembered fire. Some whispered prayers, others merely listened, though none could say for sure whether they heard ocean wind or the last low chord of the old woman's lament. In that uncertainty lay the beauty of legacy. It speaks differently to each who approaches, yet always invites listening. As the year bowed toward its pale conclusion, frost silvered the headland, and moonlight graced the tower's crown with quiet authority. Ships crossing night waters took their bearings from that steadfast glow, and mothers within low-roofed cottages guided children to sleep by murmuring names of guardians past and present. Thus Beowulf remained, not only an echoing song but in the gentle habits of an enduring people. Yet the tale has one more bend before it comes to its resting pool. Beyond the headland, beyond winter's hush, another horizon waits, where the voice of the poet will gather loose threads and gently knot them into closure. For now, though, the tower holds its watch. The sea breathes slow beneath, and starlight slides across the deep like soft remembrance, preparing a final stillness where words will soon find peace. The candle that dimmed across Beowulf's quiet barrow in our previous pause still glows, its mellow flame drifting like a thought through midnight halls. Around it the hush of the whale road lingers, waves reduced to muted silver ripples, as though the whole sea listens for final footfalls. In that softened light we turn, not to mailed warriors, but to the fragile leaves of a manuscript, each leaf carrying centuries of breath and embers. This, the Noel Codex, once slumbered in a wooden chest near a London riverbank, its aged vellum so thin that daylight shone through the letters. One winter evening in 1693, a library blaze licked the shelves. Sparks settled upon the codex like greedy fireflies, scorching its margins. By quiet miracle, the center of each folio endured, so the story survived the very element that earlier consumed Beowulf's funeral pyre. When the smoke cleared, scholars unrolled the singed pages with feathered care. Age after age they copied, glossed, and murmured over baffling lines where a scribe's ink had faded into ghostly tracery. In 19th century study rooms, gas lamps cast amber pools across oak desks, and patient linguists fitted together rune-like riddles of sound, letting old English syllables bloom again from dust. Each deciphered word felt like water offered to parched time. Then came John Ronald Reuel Tolkien, softly spoken professor and veteran of trenches. In a celebrated lecture, he insisted that the poem's monsters were not crude decorations, but the dark foreground that frames heroic light. His voice, measured and musical, asked the Academy to stop mining the verse for tribal history and simply behold the dragon gleaming on its hoard. Imaginative reading awoke anew. Stories, like spores, drift where the wind invites. Penciled panels granted Beowulf fresh angles, artists stretching sinew and scale across colored arcs of courage. From silent frames he leapt into flickering reels, celluloid coastlines, motion capture mead halls, raking starry skies. Each adaptation, whether bold or bashful, rethreaded the ancient pattern. Hero confronts terror, finds cost, returns altered while audiences felt a tremor of kinship. Beneath modern clothes. Why, after so many moon turns, does the Geat's voice still carry? Perhaps because fear and hope are siblings that never outgrow their crib. In Grendel's midnight pounding we hear the echo of unnamed troubles at the edge of any village. In Beowulf's steadfast answer we glimpse the posture we pray to assume. The poem acknowledges that victory flickers, yet insists that choosing courage creates its own lasting music. Now, gentle listener, our hearthside telling draws to its quiet conclusion. The candle beside the barrow lowers to a red ember, yet the tale it has illuminated remains awake wherever stories gather. If sleep nears, let its hush mingle with the surf that once bore a weathered ship toward Danish shores, and with the turning pages that survived flame. Tomorrow, when daylight returns, the song will still be there, waiting to be heard anew. May the memory of steadfast hearts guard your own night voyage. Rest well.